Why your first $5,000 changes your brain about money science explains it. Have you ever had this moment where you finally save a little bit of money and instead of feeling rich, you feel terrified? You open your bank app, you see a few $1,000s sitting there, and suddenly you don't want to touch it. You don't want to invest it. You don't want to spend it. You don't even want to move it. You start thinking, what if I mess this up? If that sounds familiar, look, that's literally most people. And here's the weird part. That feeling is actually a sign that something important just changed in your brain. My name is John, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, wealth building, and why smart people still make terrible financial decisions. If you're someone who works hard, tries to save, but still feels like you're one bad month away from starting over, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today we're talking about why your first $5,000 changes your brain about money. And I don't mean metaphorically, I mean neurologically, psychologically, and mathematically. And once you understand this, you'll never look at saving or spending the same way again. Here's the thing, nobody really talks about this phase. People talk about your first $1,000, your first $10,000, your first $100,000. But almost nobody talks about the psychological shock of hitting $5,000. And yet, for most Americans, this is the first time money stops being abstract. According to the Federal Reserve, nearly 40% of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something. So if you've saved $5,000, you're already ahead of a massive portion of the population. But instead of feeling confident, most people feel pressure. Why? Because for the first time in your life, you have something to lose. Look, $500 feels like spending money. $1,000 feels like a cushion. $5,000 feels like identity. Here's what most people don't realize. Your brain treats money differently depending on whether it feels replaceable or protected. Psychologists call this loss aversion. Studies show humans feel the pain of losing money about 2 times stronger than the pleasure of gaining the same amount. So losing $1,000 hurts more than gaining $1,000 feels good. Now imagine what happens when you finally save $5,000. Your brain quietly switches from, how do I get more money, to, how do I not lose this? That shift is massive. And it explains why people suddenly freeze. Now, you might be thinking, John, shouldn't having more money make me better with money? You'd think so. But behavioral economics shows the opposite often happens at first. When people hit their first meaningful savings milestone, they start overprotecting cash, avoiding investing, delaying decisions, parking money in low-interest accounts. Not because they're lazy, but because their brain is recalibrating risk. For the first time, money represents security, time, and freedom. So risking it feels personal. That's why people say, I know investing makes sense, but I don't want to mess up what I worked so hard to save. If that sounds like you, you're not broken. You're human. Let's talk numbers. At $5,000, your money can finally do something noticeable. At a conservative 7% annual return, $5,000 turns into about $1.10, 0.000 in 10 years. Leave it alone for 30 years, and it becomes roughly $3.80, Now add just $300 a month, and suddenly you're on track for 6 figures. This is where it gets really interesting. Before $5,000, progress mostly comes from you working harder. After $5,000, progress starts coming from money working with you. That's the mental shift. You're no longer just earning. You're building momentum. Have you noticed that once you save a few $1,000s, spending $100 suddenly feels painful? That's not you being cheap. That's your brain discovering opportunity cost. Before it's just $100. Now that's future growth. That's peace of mind. That's options. Here's what most people don't realize. This is the beginning of real financial intelligence. You stop asking, can I afford this? And start asking, what am I giving up if I buy this? That single question separates consumers from investors. There's also an identity shift that nobody talks about. When you hit $5,000, you stop seeing yourself as someone who tries to save. You start seeing yourself as someone who saves. Psychology backs this up. Research shows habits stick faster when they align with identity, not willpower. You're no longer forcing yourself. Saving becomes normal. And once that happens, things speed up. Now here's the frustrating part. A lot of people hit $5,000 and then immediately upgrade their lifestyle. Buy something big, or slowly drift back to zero. Why? Because the brain hasn't fully caught up yet. It still feels like this might not last. So it tests it. Here's the science. When something feels new and fragile, the brain looks for emotional relief. And spending gives that relief instantly. That's why people celebrate financial wins by undoing them. Look, $5,000 isn't rich money, but it is foundation money. Here's a simple framework that actually works. $1,500, $2,000 emergency buffer, $2,000, $3,500 growth capital, $500 learning capital, mistakes allowed. Now risk feels controlled. You're not risking everything. You're assigning purpose. And psychologically, that changes everything. Now, you might be thinking, what if I invest and lose money? Fair question. But here's the truth. The biggest risk at $5,000 isn't market loss. It's doing nothing while inflation quietly eats it away. At just 3% inflation, $5,000 loses about $1. 150 in buying power every year. Over a decade, that's real damage. Doing nothing feels safe, but it's secretly expensive. This is honestly the hardest financial phase. You care more. You have less margin for error. Every decision feels permanent. But once you push past this stage, everything changes. Confidence increases. Decisions get easier. Mistakes feel survivable. That's why people say, the first $10,000 felt impossible, but the next $50,000 felt inevitable. If you're near $5,000, do this week. Separate your money into mental buckets. Automate small investments. Keep one untouchable buffer. Track your net worth monthly, not daily. These steps reduce fear and build consistency. Your first $5,000 isn't really about money. It's about control. Control over emergencies. Control over choices. Control over your future self. Once your brain understands that, you stop panicking and start building. If you're still grinding toward your first $5,000, keep going. And if you're already there, don't rush past this moment. This is where real financial thinking begins. If this helped, hit the thumbs up so YouTube shows this to more people who need it. Subscribe if you want honest, no hype conversations about money. And remember, your first $5,000 doesn't make you rich. It makes you dangerously capable. I'll see you in the next one.